Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream Q&A for Bacurau. A big thanks to everyone at Kino Lorber for working with us on this event. My name is Jesse Trussell. I'm a repertory and specialty film programmer at BAM in Brooklyn. With us tonight, we have directors Kleber Mendonça Filho and Juliano Dornelles, as well as legendary actor Udo Kier. We'll be talking for a little while at the top and then opening things up to audience questions. So feel free to start leaving those in the YouTube chat now, and we'll get to as many as we can. Gentlemen, perhaps we could each start. You could say hello and tell us generally where you're calling in from tonight.
Hi, Kleber. I'm calling from Recife, Brazil.
Hi, Juliano here, calling from Recife, Brazil.
Hi, I'm Udo Kier. I'm calling from Palm Springs, which is at the moment the ghost town, and hello.
Thank you all again so much for joining us tonight. So we'd been originally scheduled to have Kleber and Juliano at BAM, but it was the first weekend that things began to shut down here in New York. So we are just extremely excited that we're able to have this virtual Q&A with them. So I want to get to Bacurau quickly, but Kleber and Juliano first, I just wanted to check in with you since you're calling in from Brazil on how things are going. I know that it's a difficult time for your country as it is for so many around the world right now. And if you could just share a little bit about how things are day to day for you guys.
Well, we are home. I'm home. Juliano is in his place with his family. I'm with my family. We live in the central area of Recife, which is about a city of 2 million people. I think Brazil is still dealing with a situation where the numbers are not quite accurate because there is not enough testing being done. And we have very strong governors who have very consistently reacted to the crisis, telling everybody basically to stay home. But we also have one of the two presidents, one of the two political leaders in the world who actually denies or downplays the importance of what's happening right now. The other one, the Brazilian president is Jair Bolsonaro, and the other one is in Belarus, which is the last dictatorship in Europe, known dictatorship in Europe. And then we're dealing with two situations. One is biological and the other is political. And we have to sit and wait and see what's going to happen. Brazil has many different social layers. And I'm very worried about what might happen in our country with COVID-19.
I'm glad that you guys are all safe for the moment, and I'm hope that continues into the future. Just to switch to the film a little bit now, Kleber, for years you've been making these wonderful political films in Brazil, and Juliano has been working with you first as a production designer and then now as co-writer and co-director on Bacurau. And this film is very much of a piece with this earlier work, but represents a certain kind of shift perhaps in tone. I wonder if, Juliano, perhaps you could speak towards the beginnings of this project, how you came to this subject and working in this genre.
Well, it was back in 2009. We were at a film festival with a short film called Cold Tropics, Recife Frio. It's a film that Kleber wrote and directed, and I helped a lot to do it with Emily Lesclos, our producer, the same producer of Bacurau and the other, most of those films that I work in my life, and all the Kleber films. And yeah, in this film festival, we had this special moment with the short film that is a fake documentary about the climate changing in our city. So we were at this moment working with genre cinema, very happy to do this. And we had this idea to make a film, because we saw a lot of ethnographic documentaries in this film festival, and they didn't do a good job in represent their subjects. Let me explain better. The subjects of those films are people that live in isolated communities, poor communities, and the kind of representation with a lot of condescendence and some prejudice, and we were very disturbed about this, and we had this idea to make a film to go in the opposite direction, to just state that there are no such a thing as simple people. And yeah, we started to talk about Bacurau from that, and things evolved a lot because Brazil was a very different country, and all these political changes had a bigger influence, especially when Donald Trump was about to be elected president of the United States. And I think the script gained a lot of this different personality after that. And yeah, that was that. Yeah.
Kleber, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the stylistics of the film. It's this sort of serious political subject matter jumping off from ethnographic documentary, and yet it's also made in a style reminiscent of John Carpenter and the sort of great genre films, and how you kind of found that form for this story.
Yeah, I have said many times that Carpenter has played a very important role in me wanting to make films. Not only him, of course. I could maybe make a list of 30 or 40 amazing artists who have made me want to make films. But he had a very interesting impact on my life when I was a teenager. And then also there is the fact that I'm a Brazilian, which basically means that when I set out to make films, I wanted to make the films that made me want to make films. And it's only natural. It happens in literature, it happens in music. The films or the books that make who you are, you end up repeating them in some way. Of course, the whole thing about references is, and I used to be a film critic, and I'm a cinephile, so I know that sometimes people go on safaris trying to identify the references that have made a film what it is. And it's not really that simple. References are very complex, actually. And ideas, they come from many different situations. They come from life situations. They come from the way you look at society, and they also come from cinema. And American cinema, of course, has played a very important part in my life, in the life of Juliano and so many millions of people. And for us, the challenge was to make a film which would be Brazilian through and through, but it would also feed on so many different references. And when I started making my short films, and I made some genre short films, which were received in a way that I thought there was some prejudice coming from the older generation of Brazilian film critics and Brazilian filmmakers and Brazilian film people, because they were, I mean, their thing was the 60s, when the world was divided between East and West, and anything coming from Hollywood was deemed bad. When I was a little child in the 70s, I grew up watching a lot of American films. And then in the 80s, I became a teenager watching a lot of VHS and American films in the great movie palaces, which then closed. And I just have this very intimate relationship with American cinema and Australian cinema and British films and Brazilian films, of course. And that's what Bacurau is, I think. And then I get together with a very good friend who, I mean, part of our relationship is based on our love for film, and that's where the film comes from, and that's how it worked.
Udo, I'd love to turn to you a little bit now. I would love for you to talk about how you came to be a part of this project and meeting Kleber and Juliano.
Well, first I would also like to say what a situation we are in. Weeks ago, I have the President of America, I live in America now for 30 years, saying that at the moment there's 15 cases, in 10 days there will be 0, and now it's 2,500 people dead. And it becomes kind of like a big TV show, unfortunately dealing with lives, thousands of people. Anyway, that's my situation at the moment. I live here in Palm Springs. I'm happy I have a big garden. I can cut my trees, talk to my trees, give them water, play with my dog. And I came to this film. I liked all my life. I'm doing it for 50 years. And I met Fassbinder when he was 15, I was 16. I always liked not the regular, how do you say that word? I wanted something special always in my life. Lars von Trier, Gus von Sant. And at the festival in Palm Springs, which is every year, they have, after the gala, this year I got a star on the street. They have a Variety has a party, 10 directors to watch, and that's when I met Kleber there. We talked, we had a long talk, very nice, very relaxed, not kind of selling each other. And then I got the script, and I like the script very much. For me, the script is the most important thing. First, to meet the person, if I would like to work with that person, or maybe the person has a different attitude, which I don't like. But the script, when I got the script, of course, I liked it. And it was for me a film to get involved. And of course, Sonia Braga, I loved her. I never met her before, but Kiss of the Spider Woman was for me one of the, she's a very strong woman, and to work with her, that was for me one very important, how do you say, very important thing to do. And when I went there and I saw the saying, you know, when you have never been in Brazil, you sing about Rio, you sing about dancing, having cocktails on the beach, half naked. And there I come to the town where Kleber and Juliano live. They put me from the airport one night in a hotel. I was tired. Next day, 5 hours driving to a little village in a little hotel. And the little village was just like the village of Bacurau. It was kind of typical marketplace where all people play cards, dogs are begging for food. And then I met all the actors, and they were strong. I would never, sometimes somebody told me who saw the film and said to me, the extras are great. And look, my hair is standing up now, because there were no extras. There were people and strong actors. They were amazing. I like to work with them all. There was not one person who was, the director said, oh, you go from there to there. They had all this strong personality, and we made the film, and it was one of these films which I learned from Lars von Trier not to act. I did not act. I mean, I'm not an evil guy running around with a gun, but I did not act. I had my role, and I like the idea that as an experiment, you take a little village and you take the cell phones, the connection away from them, or you do this. As an experiment, you wipe them off the card and you play with them. And, you know, then I have this crazy people who also want to do the same thing than I am. And I'm just there. And when they say, did you kill him? I said, who, me? I didn't kill anybody. It's like, it was a great experiment for me working with, and for me, this film, it's, you have to be careful with the word, but I say it. For me, this film is a masterpiece.
I
Totally,
completely agree.
totally, and oh my God, now I'm getting emotional. It's such a good film, and I like directors like him, like both of them, to work. And it was first when I heard I had two directors, I said, oh, I had that happen before. Because as an actor, you always go to one. You always go to the one you think he is on your level. But in this kind, it was when there was this strong number where I had the gun lying in the desert. It was Juliano. He said, no, not like that. No, yeah. And I had Kleber for the more kind of sensitive little things, he told me. So I had a great time. I cannot say anything about Brazil because I was in a village. I, walked in the village. I stayed in a little hotel, eating with my colleagues. And I will go back to Brazil one day. Politically, I only know what from the newspaper, but I'm not informed about this.
I understand. Kleber and Juliano, I wonder, you mentioned that you began the project in 2009, a much different political situation in Brazil, and now it's come out earlier this year in Brazil in the Bolsonaro administration. Could you talk a little bit about how this film that's about indigenous communities and Black communities in Brazil and this sort of white supremacist oppression has been received in Brazil with the release?
Well, it was phenomenally well received. It was released in August last year. It was a major topic of discussion in Brazil. It was seen by many people. It crossed over from the art house to the multiplexes. It was shown in those big XD, big fucking screens that are usually reserved for Marvel movies. It did very well, and it has become a bit of a cultural phenomenon. And me and Juliano, we observe all of this with great curiosity and interest. And it's interesting how something that's been prepared and worked on for 10 years finally catches fire once it kind of interacts with the cultural and the political zeitgeist, which is happening right now. And now with the quarantine and more people are discovering the film, not only in Brazil but in France and in the UK and in the States and Germany, and there's a whole new level of reading about what they see in the film. So it's quite peculiar. Juliano, would you add something?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you said it all. The main thing about this film in Brazil is it was the film revealed some kind of talent to to predict a lot of things that actually started to happen after we wrote the script, after we shot the film. And those similarities kind of scared a lot of people, and a lot of people were still relating the film with the actual situation in Brazil. That people are still seeing many similarities all the time. On Twitter, we still get observations from people that actually just saw the film for the first time and start to talk about those similarities. And this was one thing that impressed me a lot. We just wanted to make a film about historical things that we have in our society. And I think those things keep repeating through the years. and yeah, it was very very powerful. All these things that you know, we have this moment here in Brazil where when the National Museum caught fire, for example, and we have this museum in the film. We had these preservation areas, indigenous areas in Amazon forest that has been erased from the map, just like Bacurau. So yeah, it's still crazy. Yeah,
I just like to get something in. It's about Udo Kier. I was just listening to him talking about his experience making the film, and for me, it's very moving to listen to him in those terms. And I should always point out that it's such an amazing pleasure and an honor to have him in a film that I made with a very good friend. I love you, Udo.
I love you too, Udo.
I love you too. I love you both. Yes.
I'm going to turn now to some questions that we've been getting on YouTube. And the first one is for Udo. Udo, this question is from Cami. What kind of preparation goes into such an intense role? Do you have to prepare for it emotionally? And could you just talk a little bit about your process?
None. I had a very good script and I didn't need to practice anything in front of a mirror to be evil. I just had very good text, like when he calls me a Nazi and I say, you know, how old are you? I lived in America. I haven't been in Germany for 20 years. I lived in America all my life. How dare can you call me a Nazi? So the text was, you just have to be honest. I mean, you don't have to say, it's not theater. It was a film with a very realistic, intelligent story with great characters and an experiment. That's what we did, an experiment. And, you know, we got caught. And I don't want to tell people my ending, but my ending was the best ending. I die. You know, when you are German, you have either you play a Nazi or you play a vampire. So and you die. The bad has to die. And in this film, I disappear. I don't die. I disappear, and I say to both of the directors, maybe under the town, there is a whole casino and computers, and he really starts getting revenge now. So, you know, its preparation is, as I said before, Lars von Trier says, when we made a film, one film, with Lauren Bacall, Ben Gazzara, James Caan, Nicole Kidman, and he said, don't act. And some actors went with their shoulder. They said, I'm not acting. And he said, why the shoulder?
Don't forget that you brought two key lines for your character. You said there are many things that you can do with the knife. Yeah. And you said this is only the beginning. This comes from your familiarity with the genre cinema, right?
And I'm still not sure what they mean, but I love it.
So many things you can do with a knife.
You remember that?
But this is only the beginning.
Excellent, excellent additions.
And you think about things when you say if you're an actor, you say it's only the beginning. No, it's you think what you have to say or what you want to say, and you say it's only the beginning. Yeah, that's how it is. Next question.
The next question is from Johnny. This is for Kleber and Juliano.
Good.
The question is, can we speak about the issue of water in the film, the question of access to water, especially as how this is going to be such an important issue in the near future?
It was always an issue here in Brazil, especially in the Northeast, because the distribution of water, it was always very difficult because the people in power used the distribution of water as you know, as a way to I'm forgetting the word because yeah, but you know, it's just
To use
like
power as, yeah.
yes, sure. And I think we have a lot of history with water, with lack of water here. So we couldn't never talk about the sertão, about the our outback, without mentioning the problem with the water, I think.
And the other thing is we chose the location where we shot the film. Because of course, if you look at the Brazilian iconography of the sertão, it's mostly dry and almost gray. It's almost like a wintry landscape, except that it's 40 centigrades or 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So when we chose the location, it hadn't rained for 7 or 8 years in that location. So we chose the location, fell in love with the location. It looked like most Cinema Novo classics. It looked very dry. And then once we set up the pre-production office, the rainy season began after 7 or 8 years. And everything just suddenly just went boom, green. And then we decided, I think we made a very important decision to shoot the sertão green, because the sertão can also be green, and it's just not, it just hasn't been used many times. And in fact, we know stories of films which basically moved the whole location because the place went green, and that's not what the sertão is supposed to look like. And that says a lot about culture and how some places in some parts of the world are represented through images. So we really love the fact that it's lush and green.
There have been a couple of people who have asked about the significance of the old firearms in the film that are used first both by the killers and then in defense by the community itself. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you know, when you talk about collectors, and everybody has his or her thing about, I don't know, maybe vinyl records or taking non-digital photographs, and that would be applied to these gun crazy people. They have this thing with vintage firearms. In Bacurau, of course, there's a whole thing about history. The firearms are actually kept in a museum, which is in fact where me and Juliano believe firearms should be kept, as documents from the past, which have no use in present life, in present day life. So that was, with Bacurau, it's very easy to answer the question, because we always thought that the museum should be where the firearms are kept. And then Terry, played by Johnny Mars, he finds out by looking at the walls that the firearms are missing, almost like a Tom and Jerry style image. But yeah, it's really about this aesthetic thing that these people have. You know, they could have the state-of-the-art latest gun show firearms, but we thought that they should have the vintage firearms, you know, a 38 Colt and a classic shotgun and that kind of thing. And also the Thompson, the Tommy gun.
Juliano, perhaps you could respond to this one. A question here, sorry, I've lost it for a moment. Asking about the inspiration for the seed that they ate in the film, the psychotropic drug, and where that originated from.
The seed is just like the magic potion from Asterix. The seed can be whiskey. The seed can be, you know, in every conflict, the soldiers need to have some kind of additive to go to fight, because it's difficult to grab a gun and kill someone. Maybe it's courage it's about courage. It's about, but you know, it's just me trying to explain something that shouldn't be explained because it's, you know, I think everyone can interpretate as he wants, or she, or you know, it's, but yeah, we talked a lot about archetypes in the film, and many of those archetypes came from Asterix. We have the druid that prepares the magic potion. We have Damiano that gives the seeds to the population in Bacurau. We have the bard, the guy with the guitar. So yeah, it's those influences that we never imagine. Those influences just come up, and yeah.
But it's crazy how many questions we get about the seeds. We even got a question about the chemical composition of the seed, which I was completely stuck for an answer.
It's such a classic sort of Hitchcockian MacGuffin sort of thing.
It is a MacGuffin.
Exactly
What it is. Yeah, it is a MacGuffin. It doesn't matter. It just works, and just go with it.
We always tell people, don't buy if someone offer you in the street.
Good advice. Very good advice.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Someone else asks that says they love the reference to João Pedro Teixeira's and Eduardo Coutinho's 20 years later in Bacurau. And could Kleber and Juliano talk about Coutinho and the history of filmmaking in the Sertão?
Yeah, I should actually thank BAM Cinematheque for putting together the Rise Up program, which we did not actually get to see because of the cancellation. And there was another wonderful program that we ourselves put together at Lincoln Center called Mapping Bacurau. And one of the films that we programmed was 20 years later, which in Brazil is known as Cabra Marcado para Morrer. I think it's one of the greatest Brazilian films ever made. It was shot 100 miles from where we live. It began as a fiction piece in 1964, and then the coup d'etat, the military coup happened, and the shoot they had to stop shooting the film. And then Coutinho went back in the early 80s, and then he did a documentary on the real life characters who were affected by the military coup d'etat and the violence from the state violence. So it's a beautiful film. It's very much present in my first film, Neighboring Sounds. And in spirit, I mean, going back to references, in spirit, it's very tough. It's very difficult to actually identify where this film is in Bacurau, but in spirit, it's very much part of what Bacurau is. And we do mention João Pedro Teixeira, who was actually murdered back in 1964, and his death caused a diaspora in his own family, which they have basically been victimized by state violence, and that's what the film is about. So there is a lot of the spirit of that documentary in this film, but it's very hard for me to explain how and why the film ended up being in Bacurau. It's part of what we did.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can imagine because Eduardo, we agree. We actually agree with the way that Coutinho represents his subjects in his films.
Yes.
So this is one very important thing about it, and especially in Cabra Marcado para Morrer, it's people from the Sertão. It's people from the Northeast, and poor people. You know, exactly like the people from Bacurau, people that are trying to resist to a threat, a very powerful threat, an outside threat. So I think this is the obvious relationship that we can find it. But the representation for me, it's the most important thing.
It's a question from Daniel. Do you think this sort of film Bacurau sets a path forward or a tone or new aesthetics for the Brazilian cinema? Do you think there will be more movies as revolutionary as Bacurau in the coming future in Brazil?
Well, every time a film or a piece of music or a book comes out, it seems it works its own way into people's minds and brains, and it's very tough. It's very hard for me as one of the people who made the film to say what will happen after Bacurau. But it's only natural that, I mean, it has happened to myself. I have been impacted by films and books and music. I don't know. I remember walking past a record store in, I don't know, 92, 91, and hearing something, going back and asking, what is this? And the guy said, it's a band called Nirvana. And I said, Nirvana? Oh, that's pretty, that's strong. You know, so I don't know what kind of effect Nirvana has had on my working with film, but Recife had a very strong music scene in the 90s, which has given me a lot of energy, you know, the Mangue Beat movement and Chico Science and Nação Zumbi, and they have done amazing, two amazing albums back in the 90s, just before he tragically died in a car accident. So all these things, they work on you, and you become part of what they were and what they did and what the music was about. And then, of course, I can go back to the late 90s when I saw Suspiria, and Suspiria has this man called Udo Kier, and then I see him in Gus Van Sant film, and then he becomes part of my life because he did The Kingdom by Lars von Trier, which, by the way, is a fantastic television series, before television series became respected the way they are today. And then he did so many other films which are part of my life. And then I ended up working with him. So all these things, they are almost like chemistry. They are not almost like, they are chemistry on a biological level. And that's how you are who you are. You are what you see and what you eat. And you are also the people you have relationships with, you know, friendship and love. And that's what making films is about, I think.
Perhaps a related question. I know that in the past you've, you know, with these strong political statements that you have made in your films and in your life, you've received some sort of, you know, blowback and attention from state actors. With Bacurau, such a pointed film, has there been any of that recently? You know, I know you've dealt with some specific sort of things around funding for Neighboring Sounds. And I wonder if you could just sort of talk generally about that, or making political work in a not maybe the most receptive, let's say, environment for it with the federal government there.
Well, the first thing is I don't wake up one day and say I'm going to make a political film. It just doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way with Neighboring Sounds, with Aquarius, or with Bacurau. And Juliano is a good witness. We never planned to make a political film. We just make films about the way society works and the way the world functions. And then you end up with a political film. But I'm not the first artist, and I won't be the last artist to be questioned by people in government about what is it that you're doing, and about making them mad about something that I did. And that's one of the greatest compliments that I could ever have. When the country you live in and that you love veers away from democracy, you begin to feel little kind of a strange climate, you know, when things begin to not make sense anymore. And that's when the truly horrible, evil people, usually men, white men, they come up with things for you and against you, which are kind of created in a lab, and then we just have to deal with it, you know, using the very good side of justice. And in a way, I'm very proud of everything that I have done and everything that I have said so far, because I really believe that I have been, for the last 5 years, on the right side of history. I think Juliano is a witness to this.
You're in the right side of history all your life, man. I think.
I completely agree, and I will say, living in America for my whole life, the idea of that drift away from democracy is something that rings chillingly true to me in the last few years here. A slightly lighter question to come up next. Udo, there are several people asking about the incredible painting that you have over your right shoulder. Would you share where perhaps you got that wonderful piece?
Yeah,
You mean the pigs?
Yes, the pigs.
Okay. About the painting, but then I want to say something else. About the painting, it's a friend of mine, Delbert McBride, and he painted this. It's called Making Bacon, because it's packing. And I liked it, so I have it in my house. I collect art all my not all my life, but when I could afford it, from Man Ray to Andy Warhol. So, but I want to say something which is also how much I enjoyed working with both of you. And that's why we had a great moment, Kleber and myself, in Cannes at the premiere, when we gave each other a hug, we put our arms around each other, and we were very, very emotional. And it was, we forgot the whole world around us. And I mean, it's Cannes. So the thing is, I'm very happy that I made this film with Kleber and Juliano, because we will work again. That is always all the directors who I liked, and like Lars, like Gus, I always work with them again, because it's so beautiful, because the whole bullshit of getting to know each other. I want to say that, and then I want to say one more thing, of making the film in Brazil. There was no kind of star treatment. We didn't have a van with our name on. We all went in a truck, and the raining season was there, and the car gets stuck, and we all helped to get that car out. And then we came finally after 40 minutes to the village, and we start working. And that is the beauty, what I like about filmmaking. And I'm so happy to meet, you know, I have, last thing I say, I have never asked directors like, oh, we should work, da, da, da. I sit in an airplane, next to me a man, and he wants my telephone number. It's Paul Morrissey, Andy Warhol. All these people in my life, they were just there at one moment, and we became not friends. We worked, then became friends, and we will be friends for the rest of our lives. That's I want to say that, and that's a pig fucking. Yeah.
Nicely put. Nicely put.
Two beautiful sentiments. The next question from Amine. For Kleber and Juliano, how did you decide upon the balance between the electronic score and the more traditional Brazilian pop music, the beautiful Tropicalia music you use?
It wasn't a decision. We just always had this list of wonderful music that we, since the beginning of the writing of the script, we wanted to use. Some of it we gave up, we didn't use it. Some of it survived until the end. For example, the synthesizer song music from John Carpenter, The Night, it was supposed to be used in the overture of the film. But you know, it survived in a very different scene, because we understood that in the beginning of the film, with the image of the space, it will be underlining something that it was already in the screen. You know what I mean? It's like we always like the idea to put two very different aesthetics in collision. If you see the image of the space and you listen to a tropicalist song by Caetano Veloso, sung by Gal Costa from the 70s, it is something more interesting because we have this image, Hollywoodish image from the space in collision with this very Brazilian music. It's the same example in the moment of the capoeira, because capoeira is a very Brazilian thing, not Brazilian, Afro descendant, but you have this collision again. You have this industrial synthesizer music overrunning the moment of the capoeira. But this is just one thing to think about the music in the film. We had other kinds of insights for the use, but all I can say, it was very organic. We just sometimes we just needed to put a music in that place, in the editing room. We needed to find something that could fit in that moment in the film, and we just started to research in the internet, and we discovered many wonderful possibilities. And yeah, it's very organic. We never made a Cartesian planning to the use of music in the film, I think.
It's always interesting to point out that there are probably 3 steps into working using music in the film. At writing stage, Carpenter's Night was one of the first elements written into the film. It would go into the opening of the film, and it ended up in the editing going to the capoeira sequence. During the shooting of the film, we talk to people, we feel vibes, and we get ideas, and then we take down notes, and then new stuff comes in. And in post-production, even in the last week of editing or mixing, something new comes in and is part of the film. So it's really divided in 3 different elements. And of course, I should feature the work of Mateus Alves and Tomás Alves de Souza, 2 brothers from Recife, and they composed the original music. Mateus did the more orchestral pieces, and Tomás did some of the more electronic pieces, in fact, with the strong influence of Mr. Carpenter. By the way, Mr. Carpenter, I hope you see our film. I know sometimes I'm afraid that you see the film, you seem to be a bit of a grumpy guy, but I love you. So it would probably ruin my day if you hated it. But just watch it and don't bother to tell us what you thought of it. Just see the film.
Someone out there slip a link to it to John Carpenter and then tell him to hold his own. I think we have time for about one more question. This one is from Marina. So for Kleber and Juliano, was there one thing that you had to leave out from the script to the shooting, or from the shooting to the edit? One thing that you wish you could have gotten into the film, or was there any major sort of change or shift along the way?
I don't remember anything.
What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
We probably have 30 seconds of there's one scene with Udo where he meets he in the original script, and this is an interesting this is something interesting that I can say about script writing. Some things are great on page, but then they don't really work on film. So Udo had the first encounter with Carmelita, and today, of course, in the finished
Oh, well
film,
remembered.
he sees Carmelita right at the end, which I think is a very interesting scene. But he would have a first encounter with Carmelita right after the huge argument that he has with Terry in the compound. He leaves the argument, goes outside in the farm, and then he sees Carmelita for the first time. So that's a scene that takes about 25 seconds, and that was cut because it was more interesting for him to see her the one time at the end of the film. And then we have something that we put on the Brazilian DVD and Blu-ray, which is a scene in the public market with Sonia Braga and Isa, her partner in the film. They were buying some things, but it didn't really help the film in any way. It was the classic scene that could be cut.
I have one last question of my own before we go. I think a really interesting detail in the film that I personally love that you have in is during the credits, you note that the making and the distribution of it created and facilitated 800 jobs in the Brazilian film industry. Could you talk a little bit about why that was important for you to have that acknowledgement within your credits?
Well, it's important because we are living the moment in Brazil that the people in the government are trying to destroy the film industry. The film industry in Brazil, I think it's about 300,000 people that lives from the audiovisual industry here. So it's a very big industry. We are bigger than the pharmaceutical industry. We say this every time. And they just don't like cinema. They just don't like culture, and they decided to end it. So we needed to do something about it, and we put that information, very important information for the people that go to the movie theater to understand how important is for a country that needs to have jobs and to make to make the economy works. And yeah, I think we are living this very difficult moment in Brazil that we need to keep repeating obvious things all the time.
It's very interesting to point out that Brazil, over the last 15 years, built a very clever, very democratic system of funding for the arts and for film. Much like France, Italy, Portugal, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And so public funding for film is not some kind of bizarre scheme. It's actually part of what the industry, and it's how the industry works. Even in the United States, I mean, if you look at a film like Transformers, I think it's one of the Transformers films by Michael Bay. It was shot in Detroit because Detroit was actually interested in having Transformers there. So they had a lot of tax breaks for the film to be shot there. And when a film like that is shot in a city like Detroit, it brings a lot of money to the city. So in Brazil, we have basically had the destruction, the demolition of the Brazilian film industry. And when we were in post-production for Bacurau, and we already knew the film would be in competition at the Cannes Film Festival, we thought that we should put that in bold lettering at the end of the film, and in this very kind of emotional moment that with the music and send the message out. And since we did that, a number of Brazilian films have used the same information with their own numbers. And right now, we really want, I mean, the success of Bacurau is actually a poster boy for Brazilian cinema. And Brazilian cinema had an amazing year last year. And just now in Berlin at the Berlinale, we had 19 films at the Berlinale in different sections, including the competition. So it really is shameful that the Brazilian film industry is being destroyed out of spite and with this gleeful, I mean, it's done with pleasure, you know, and it's really a shame, and it's very sad.
No, I mean, I completely
It's the
hear it.
same guy that keeps saying to people, go to the streets to work, back to work, you know, in a fucking pandemic. Yeah.
Coronavirus is
The
just a
same
little,
guy.
yeah.
I mean, I agree entirely. As you know, as an American, we are in such a difficult and uncertain time here, and that funding and support for the arts, which are so vital to our culture, it's important not to forget that in all of this really difficult time we're all going through. I think it runs about out of time for the night, but I want to thank all three of you so much for being here with us tonight. Thank you, everyone who tuned in, and
Thank
a
you.
reminder.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Jesse.
A reminder that Bacurau is still streaming in virtual screening rooms via Kino Lorber that support local theaters and local movie theaters all across America. So definitely go on Kino's site, find out where you can stream Bacurau to support this incredible film and your local theater. Thank you again so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.